Thank you very much for joining us for, let me shrink my camera. Thank you very much for joining us for our fourth CHROME meeting, CHROME and Quoris3D meeting. We've been through the process of records and through a little bit of smile analysis and the workup of a smile and the workup of sometimes the challenging records for CHROME. And then we went through the first surgical process, the pin guide and the fixation base 2 meetings ago. And then last meeting we covered the carrier guide and the osteotomy guide. And then today we are going to cover the prosthetic, the Nano-Ceramic Prosthetic and the RAPID Appliance. We have this great partnership with Quoris3D, bringing CHROME to many places around Europe. It's actually a very exciting partnership. Just like the last few, just a real quick statement of what CHROME GuidedSMILE is. It's a pre-planned surgery that starts with the smile simulation and ends with a predictable method of delivering the final restoration. We're going to talk about that part today, how to go from delivery of the surgical prosthetic to the final prosthetic and what a snap it is to complete. CHROME delivers bone reduction guidance, osteotomy guidance, implant control, abutment insertion, and a simplified prosthetic conversion and very simplified method of converting to the final restoration, which I know after thousands of restorations, our doctors love that part of it, going to the final. So we are going to discuss these 2 items here, the RAPID Appliance and the Nano-Ceramic Prosthetic. So on the left is a milled PMMA. We call it a nano-ceramic because it's not just a generic PMMA. It has some glass infiltration. It's more aesthetic than regular PMMAs. We've used many different systems. We've settled on this one. We love it. It's beautiful. It's strong and designed to last through the healing process. And then on the right, that's the RAPID Appliance, which is a duplicate of the one on the left. And the RAPID is the key to transferring the final records to the laboratory, to Quoris3D for the final. And then on the top right, backup dentures. And we have a couple different types of dentures based on the need, based on the type of surgery. 1 arch, 2 arch, and we'll talk about that at the very end. So today, we're going to talk about smile design for Nano, just some real quick screenshots of what we do to work up one of these beautiful ceramic restorations. And the setup that we do using the smile. And then we have a whole bunch of tips of do's and don'ts during the surgery. And then the RAPID Appliance, and then the backup denture. So believe everybody, just about everybody knows All-on-4. And we and Quoris3D have been involved in All-on-4s for many years. In our facility, we have traveling technicians, and we've completed thousands of All-on-4 conversions clinically with doctors with us there chairside. And it's a nice service. I think with today's technology, it's become a little dated, and I don't mean that offensively at all to anyone listening. I don't mean it like that. I just mean that if there's a much more technologically advanced procedure like CHROME, like some other systems out there that are guided, then I personally believe they should be taken advantage of. The systems along the top are copycats. The first one, Nobel Biocare, well, that was the original, Palomalo, and the Nobel implant. That's what started. And then the copycats followed, right? The Astra, Uni4Fix, Teeth Express, ProArch, Revitalize, DM2. They're essentially the same thing. They're a denture. They are angled implants with multi-unit abutments, temporary cylinders, and a freehand system to deliver a denture. And I put this slide together because this kind of shows what all these cases have in common. The implant is free-handed based on sometimes a pan, usually these days a CT, but in the maxillary, you just kind of puncture the sinus and find where it is, and then take some, kind of, again, I don't mean to insult anybody at all, but kind of some rudimentary measurements and angles, and you use this little device here in All-on-4 that Nobel developed, and freehand the implants. Implants are placed, and you'll notice then, and there are some advantages and disadvantages to this type of ridge. It's often not the most aesthetic. or hygienic because it's not flat. That's one of the beautiful things about doing a chrome case. Now this case here is relatively flat, but as you know, a lot of the cases, it's not a total flattening of the ridge, but more putting implants in. And then it's a kind of a simple block out, and then a denture pickup. And the denture pickup is time consuming, usually requires a lab technician to be there for hours. The process for the most part is probably 7:30 in the morning until 1 o'clock in the afternoon in most clinics, most situations. And it's taking a traditional denture and basically grinding it and attaching it to implants. And I guess I think of that as a little bit more old school today, even though it's still the most popular way to do it. We just think that there's a better method. And one of the beautiful things about doing guided is that I'll go back up, once you are finished with this prosthetic, look at all the stages that have to happen down the road. Now, there are some techniques of taking a converted denture and articulating soft tissue model, sending it to the laboratory. But for the most part, when it comes for the restorative phase of an all-on-4 type case, you start from scratch. Stock tray, implant level impression, fit verification, jig, bite blocks, setups, bar design, transfer the setup to the bar, perform another reset, and go to final. And that's 7 appointments, and that's probably the normal process, 7 appointments. 7 appointments with 2 weeks or more in between. Sometimes it's more because of lab time or patient schedule. You're at 2.5 to 4 months to complete one of these cases, the traditional method. And our argument to CHROME, and perhaps spending a little more, a little more cost up front in the day of surgery, leads to a very simplified prosthetic protocol. And so you might have an appointment consult, an appointment for records, an appointment for surgery, and then restoratively, you have a rapid appliance, seating and pickup and reline, and you could and sometimes go directly to the final restoration. 2 restorative appointments instead of 7. Sometimes 3 with a reset. So it's a very efficient protocol for the restorative, which everybody that we work with loves that part of it. That's what makes it such a treat to work with. So as the first part of the agenda and of a CHROME case, it always starts with a smile simulation, or at least photographs of the patient. We recommend that being the first thing that happens during a records phase, because often the photographs are taken and the patient's already had impressions, and their mouths are already uncomfortable and a little bit stretched, and they have impression material hanging on their lips, and it's just not quite as glamorous shot as a photograph taken as soon as the patient enters a room. So first thing to do is take a nice full face, full smile photograph, then take a relaxed one. We like to see the lips at rest, and then retract it left, right, and center. Those are the photos for CHROME. This is what helps us make this nano-ceramic aesthetic. We recommend that with any case where the maxillary, maybe if the patient has dentures and the teeth are already beautiful, there's really no need to do a smile simulation. But most of these cases are not dentures. They're patients who've been suffering with dental problems. And so we recommend doing a smile simulation. We use this company called Preview. James is partnered with Preview, and he will provide smile simulations for you. Does it have to be for every CHROME case? I think no. I think it could be for any type of case. It takes the patient from this condition on the left to this condition on the right, and it can be in just a matter of minutes. If you have the software, or if you send it over to James, it could be a couple hours or even next day. But a patient in this condition is more likely to say yes, and if they do, we use this smile to perform the setup and to perform the prosthetic. So this is what they're going to wear to surgery. It's not a perfect one-to-one, but it's pretty close, because we superimpose. I'm kind of going through some slides here. Let me just pause that for a second, so everybody knows that Preview has a smile catalog, which James can provide, and the doctor can share the smile catalog with the patient, They can pick oval, square, rectangular, triangle, and even within that, there are of course variations. It's not, these aren't just stamped out repeated smiles, chiclets. They can have some variation. We can have some back and forth about the smile simulation, but for the most part, patients love ovoid, square, rectangular, triangle, considering where they are now and where they're going to be. So with that photograph, this is what we will do. I'm going to take a little process, a little more detail, but this is just a case that we did last fall. And this is a smile simulation on the left, and on the right is what we delivered. And the patient loved it. And I think the patient was actually in media, and she did her own selfie webinars and posted them everywhere. And we were able to actually show that what she arrived with, which was a denture, and then a smile simulation, what we delivered, were very, very close, almost a one-to-one. And this is the process we go through. So we take a smile simulation, if you've performed one. If not, we do one on our end when it's needed, and often share it with the doctor. If it's needed, if there's going to be many changes, we'll email it to the doctor, but we will superimpose the three-dimensional models within the smile. So the new simulation goes over the 3D model, and then we bring in the smile simulation, and then we perform a setup all the way through the whole process here until we have the denture teeth, essentially the three-dimensional denture teeth within the smile. And this will be the setup that we go to surgery with, all following facial symmetry, smile design, face shape. If we do it on our own, those are all the parameters that we use to make a smile. And so we will take the patient's three-dimensional models, or in this case, I believe this was a denture. The denture is used as our study model for our tooth setup. So replace the denture tooth and put a simulated tooth in, and follow it exactly in this case, and then following the smile simulation. And with that smile, this is what we sent to that particular surgery, made from those setups. So let's so that was the smile simulation part of it, and how we produce the prosthetic. What I want to go into now is some key components of the Nano-Ceramic, some of the very important features of the prosthetic and how it works with the carrier guide. If you look on the left, the carrier guide, and we discussed this a little bit last week, the carrier guide is 3 millimeters thick. And this dimension, 3 millimeters, goes from the intaglio of the prosthetic to the bone. So that simulates tissue thickness. So that's kind of an important thing to know. Sometimes if we don't have the 3 millimeter space because of some diagnostic work, sometimes the prosthetic will actually connect straight to the fixation base. And you'll notice that right away when you take it out of the package. I might have an image of that later, or I can pull an image up at the end if you're interested in seeing that. The carrier guide has holes that match up exactly with holes in the Nano-Ceramic prosthetic. So the temporary cylinder goes through the carrier guide and then through the prosthetic for luting. The prosthetic is connected to the carrier guide with this male-female relationship. So there are 2 males that come up on the carrier guide, and then there are reciprocating holes on the Nano-Ceramic that they marry together, male-female. And then, and I mentioned just something here, some caution. Be careful with these males. You want to gingerly remove the prosthetic vertically. You don't want to torque it off because they are plastic and they can break. So you want to be careful with them. So because we already went through the surgery, putting the implants in, putting the abutments in, putting the temporary cylinders in the last meeting, we'll start from that exact point on this meeting. So you at this point, obviously the implants are in, the carrier guide is seated, and then we provide these green gaskets to block out the acrylic from going underneath and locking anything in. And these little green gaskets are paper thin, so they do not elevate the prosthetic, even if they're layered. And then we also include these blue plugs. So it's double protection. You protect the flow underneath the carrier guide, and then you protect the flow from going inside of these temporary cylinders. And that comes with every case. The next step, once the prosthetic is seated, and we'll go through a whole bunch of like a whole FAQ about the prosthetic seating, do's and don'ts, that kind of thing, and things to watch out for. But let's say the prosthetic is seated and you're ready to lute it to the temporary cylinders. We used to only provide Voco self-cure luting acrylic, but we switched over to Stellar a couple months ago, and this is the main material. This is our standard that we send now, and there's a number of reasons that we do it. Number one, it is dual cure. And so rather than waiting for 1 minute and 20 seconds, like you have to do with both of them on a self-cure, you're able to tack this in. And I have some more specs on Stellar coming up. But it also comes in white. So you have a pink and a white with every case, and that is very nice for the occlusal part of the pickup. So you do have the option of Voco, and you do have the option of Stellar, either one, but our standard is Stellar. We think it's a better material. So the process, little video here. Just like mentioned before, the temporary cylinders are in, and the gaskets are sleeved over the temporary cylinders. Sit tight here. Prosthetic is delivered, and you want to make sure that it's passive, and we'll have some slides on that coming up. Passive insertion, and then as you can see right away, the doctor goes into putting the plugs in, and then backfilling with the in this case it's a Voco material right there. It's an angled tip that goes down inside the hole and just around the cylinder. Try not to get any, over the top of the cylinder, locking in those blue plugs. The idea here is that you connect the prosthetic to the temporary cylinder on every site, and now the prosthetic is connected, and you simply unscrew and remove the prosthetic, take it back into the laboratory, and then fill all the holes. You can see for any number of reasons, the doctor did not pick up this site. But the hole obviously will still have to be filled in. So you'll use either Quick Up or Stellar, and then you'll backfill around each site to make sure that it's perfectly connected and sealed to the prosthetic. You'll also fill, I don't have a picture of it, but you'll fill the little female areas here where we're connected to the carrier guide. So you want to fill all the holes on the intaglio, and then you want to flip it over, and then you want to adjust any exposed metal, and then fill in the pink here. And you can, depending on where it is on the occlusion, you can add a little bit to it and then adjust it when you're seating the prosthetic if needed. This is all pink because this was Voco, but I'll show a Stellar case here in just a little bit. Now the process from the seating of the prosthetic to luting it to the temporary cylinders, taking it back in the laboratory and filling the voids is a 15-minute per arch time. It's a very quick process, compared to an all-on-4 denture conversion and making a model and using a pressure pot and heat and acrylic and so forth. This is very, very quick. And so this was a double arch case. Maybe 30 minutes of completing both upper and lower, and then seating. It's a very efficient process. And please, if you have questions on that process, write them down, and we'll answer them all in the very end. But we'll go through a whole bunch of do's and don'ts here. So one of the things is just a tip: if you have to adjust the prosthetic to seat, have a Sharpie and just mark on the prosthetic where the prosthetic is contacting the temporary cylinder. Now this case that I'm showing is a little old, but sometimes these things still happen where the prosthetic is not able to be seated because of the trajectory of the temporary cylinders or the position of the temporary cylinders. If it's an angled implant and the implant was placed too deep or shallow, then you have a situation like this. Implant might have been placed too deep, and all of a sudden it's pushed mesially, like an all-on-4 type setup, and then all of a sudden now it's contacting the prosthetic, or the prosthetic has, the prosthetic has to be adjusted. So you make a couple little marks here. My suggestion is that to avoid having to adjust these prosthetics is to fully know the capabilities of your guided kit, and to determine whether it's fully guided or partially guided. And what I mean by that is a partially guided surgical kit only controls the drills. It controls the trajectory and the depth of the drill. It does not control the implant. The implant is free-handed. And if the implant is free-handed, then it comes down to judgment, and can often be too deep or too shallow based on thread exposure, bone reduction, if you're in a socket, those types of situations. But if you have a fully guided kit, then the implant is placed through the osteotomy guide, is managed by the guided kit, and you hub out and you stop at a certain distance, and then you'll have an implant in the proper position. It may be off a little bit on the rotation, but once you learn exactly how to use the guided kit, then really the rotation should be right too, and it should be a very simple process of putting the implants in and having them work perfectly with the prosthetic. So that was the tip. Sorry, I kind of went off on a tangent there, but using the Sharpie to mark the prosthetic. I also suggest adjusting the prosthetic out of the mouth, because there's going to be acrylic, there's going to be materials, and you want to keep those out of the sight. Little surgical tip. And then it is pretty important to add a sufficient amount of material. And I have some examples here of where, yes, the temporary cylinder may be luted just fine and securely to the prosthetic, but you can see that there are voids, many voids in this case. And one of the worst things that happens is you take this back in the laboratory and this comes loose, and you have to go back to the mouth and pick it up again. And really the idea is that once this comes out and goes back in the laboratory, the doctor is removing the fixation base, removing the pins, suturing, moving on with the surgery towards prosthetic delivery. And you would not want to have to go back and pick up one of these temporary cylinders. Of course, there's a technique for that, which is if this one's loose and the other 4 are secure, then you would screw those 4 down and you would just pick this one up again. Right? You could do that without having the fixation base in. But if there were 2 of them or 3 of them that came loose because of contamination or because there wasn't enough material, then that's going to be an issue. If you're using Voco, I always say, you want to know your materials. I put an X here because with Stellar, you don't need a tray adhesive, an adhesive. But if you're still using Voco, be sure to use the adhesive. If you do not use the adhesive, it will not bond to the acrylic and it will come loose during mastication every time. It helps to roughen up the inside, whether you're using Stellar or Voco. But roughen it up just a little bit on the inside, but be sure to use tray adhesive if you're using Voco. And then again, these are just some specs on Stellar. Self-cure is 120 seconds, 2 minutes. Definitely recommend if you have a light, use a light. You're going to get a better cure. They even recommend if it's certain patient, certain type of situation, you just know you have to get a great bond right off the bat. Perhaps it's position of implants, parafunction, whatever the reason is, then you could even put it in hot water, maybe 172 degrees, put it in hot water for a few minutes, and then you know you have a full cure. But you also have a 20-second full cure light activated, and then a 6-second tack. And those are the main reasons we started working with Stellar. Now, with most labs, most companies, most conversions like this, you pretty much have pink. It's either pink resin or it's maybe pink Voco, but it's nice to have another option. You know, this is the same case. This is I think is it? Is it the same case? I thought they told me it was. I think it's the same case. The patient hated the pink, so our technician and the doctor actually went back in and removed some of this pink around the cylinder and added white, which was a top material, and it does look nicer. You know, here's a case where we used white in some areas where we probably should have used pink. So we send both. I think this one's probably a little overdoing it. The patient is probably going to think that's kind of strange looking to have those white spots in there. But it's also strange to have pink spots on the white teeth. So with us, you have options. Another tip, and this one is infrequently used, but if you're in a situation where you're at the very end and you're seating the nano-ceramic and the patient is hitting, you know, for instance, in this case, hitting in the anterior first, that perhaps that was a technical issue at the lab, perhaps it was a bite issue that nobody caught at the very beginning, but instead of just grinding all this beautiful tooth anatomy away to have the prosthetic seat, you can do a little shim technique. And so you open the patient up and you can use either those little blue plugs, you can use really just about anything, part of a cotton pellet, anything, to place in between the carrier guide and the prosthetic to shim the prosthetic in the right occlusal. So, I mean, I know the whole conversation around this. Obviously, if you're shimming it, you're probably opening the bite, or you're probably opening the bite at least halfway of where it was. And we can talk about that with questions at the end. If you're more comfortable, this is a judgment call by the doctor. If you're more comfortable adjusting the occlusion halfway and then shimming it halfway, perhaps that would be the best protocol. But this is just a nice kind of like a bailout technique. And one thing to know is that on the carrier guide, it's a good idea to cut the male component at least half off, if not a little bit more, so that when you do shim, you don't break off those male components. You know, this is that case. This is Dr. Sinclair, good customer of ours, many cases, and he shared this picture with us of how he shimmed it, and it turned out just fine. Patient might have been a little bit open, and then that's addressed later during the restorative. So that's how I mentioned, a little shim can help, because if you didn't do the shim, this is what it would have looked like. Open the posterior, and then what do you adjust? You adjust the lower anteriors, you adjust the upper linguals, you add composite to the posteriors. I mean, there's options, but really shimming would be the best technique for it. Must not allow distal extension 5 millimeters beyond the terminal implant. So there's different rules on this. You know, for final restorations, the rule is generally 8 millimeters past the terminal implant. As far as a final restoration, final zirconia, 8 to 10 millimeters, depending on the material. 8, you're safe. If it's a very strong titanium substructure, or if it's a zirconia and it has good sized connectors, you can go 10 millimeters, even 12 millimeters if the patient doesn't have a history of bruxism. But on the temporary, either the nano or the, well, not on the rapid appliance, you'll want this to pick up a flange. But on the prosthetic, you can trim these off. I have a picture of it here. So even though this is not the most aesthetic, terminal end of a prosthetic, it has been removed, and you don't have the problem of it breaking. Because if a prosthetic is going to break, it's going to break right here between the last implant, right down the middle of it. And then, of course, that's trouble, especially if you're just coming out of healing and you can't remove the prosthetic, and now you have an implant that's partially or not secured at all by the prosthetic. So just be sure that and the question is, well, why would a prosthetic leave the laboratory with more than 8 millimeter cantilever? Sometimes they do. So just keep an eye out for that. It's our mistake. If you have a tough bite situation, we always include a silicone bite. And so, you know, in this situation, this patient is going to be was biting in several different areas, did not have a habitual bite. So seat the pink matrix, and then seat the prosthetic into it, upper lower, marry the two together, and then you can loop the prosthetic together. In this case, you will probably want to have either us place or you place labial ports, one in each implant position, so that you can just simply squirt facially into each site and connect the prosthetic to the temporary cylinder. One important thing, and I kind of seen this a few times over the years, where maybe a dental technician or well, doesn't matter who, added too much material to the intaglio of the prosthetic. And perhaps it was to fill a gap. Perhaps it was, you know, just to try to make it all, you know, smooth and you know, from the temporary cylinder to the prosthetic. But this can cause a few problems. Number one, this is not going to seat, because these and the MUAs this is going to connect to are either at the crest, could be a little subcrestal, I'm sorry, subgingivally, and then all of a sudden you're blanching the tissue and putting pressure on it, and it's not going to seat, and you're going to end up relieving all this back again. So just like in this case here, you just don't need all this acrylic around it. And maybe, I think I have some pictures coming up that show it, but you really just want to have this leveled off right to the top of the prosthetic, and then just kind of backfill around these temporary cylinders, but flush with the prosthetic and perhaps just a little bit underneath it, but don't make an emergence. Don't contour it like that, because it will be a problem seating the prosthetic. We've talked about this during the surgery part, but also in the restorative part here. This is you know, this is not a good thing, because this prosthetic could have been putting an axial torque on that implant. We don't want to have a prosthetic touching a temporary cylinder really ever. This should be 100% passive. And these are, I think some of these images are from the previous, but so here, this is an indicator that the temp cylinder may touch the prosthetic. It's touching the carrier guide. In here, there's some contact. Here, there's some contact. And I'm just guessing this was a case where there were multiple angled implants. You can see that there's some reduction around the sides of these, and that the implants were not rotated perfectly, and the temporary cylinders were crooked, and the prosthetic had to be adjusted. So just be sure it's not touching a temporary cylinder. You know, again, here's another angled implant, just really probably in the wrong trajectory, touching the prosthetic. And then don't add a flange. I think I have a picture here. I don't know how many, if things are obvious or not, but don't add a flange to it. This patient hardly had a gap. But the team added a flange anyway. They didn't want any airspace. They wanted to cover it up. Well, this is going to be a problem. You know, food trap, discomfort, healing, sutures. I mean, there's just all the kinds of things that can happen when you do this. So these cases are intended to have eventually a little bit of a tissue gap as the patient heals, and perhaps a little tissue gap at the day of surgery. And that's not always such a bad thing. If for some reason you are using some kind of blockout, we used to use a flowable blockout, be sure that it does not have any thickness to it above the carrier guide. You don't want this lifting the carrier guide out of occlusion. I should just always use our green gaskets. So that was the prosthetic, mostly to do with the prosthetic. So let's talk about the rapid appliance, and this is the key to you know, going to the final restoration, as we mentioned. So with every surgery, you want to order an extra set of temporary cylinders, because this extra set is going to be used to pick up the rapid appliance. So believe James sends an email out to you with a drill report, or we do in the online meeting, and the drill report has the abutment size, and it has a recommendation for collar height, and then it mentions ordering 2 sets of temporary cylinders. Very important, because you don't want to have to substitute that or sacrifice that just because there weren't enough parts ordered for the surgery. So always order 2. I have kind of a video here that shows what these rapid appliances look like when they come to the laboratory. Now, these are picked up in the mouth. This one had a little pink. You can pay a little bit extra to have pink on it if, if the patient has any aesthetic demands. That during that restorative process, you can add pink to it. But these cases are simply sent in after the first appointment 6 months down the road. Patient went through surgery. Patient shows up ready for the final restoration. The Nano-Ceramic Prosthetics are removed. The rapid appliances have tray adhesive added to the intaglio. They're seated, either one or in this case both double arch. They're seated and then equilibrated until you're 100% satisfied. The teeth are coming together exactly as you want, equilibrated. And then you'll perform a reline impression underneath it, medium body, heavy body, to fill that gap so we can make a soft tissue model. And so, as you can imagine, if we have prosthetics, a bite, implant position, tissue position, mounted on a cast, essentially we have everything we need to go to at least a prototype, if not straight to a final restoration. I know we have some clinicians who, especially on lowers, they will take a little extra time at this first appointment, and they will adjust the flanges, they'll adjust the teeth, they'll even add to it, maybe add some composite to it, have the patient go through speech, adjust the thickness, spend some time at that appointment and go right to final. 2 appointments, rapid appliance to a final. And I don't know if there's any other easier method out there for converting to final restorations. I have a few do's and don'ts on the rapid appliance. So if we design a rapid appliance like this, we did it on purpose, even though there might be a cantilever back here. When the rapid comes in, we want you to capture the ridge underneath it. And that's why we leave these extensions. Often there's an extension that's the inverse of this. So the case may stop here at the second bite, or it may stop at the first molar, and the flange comes back and around so that you have kind of like a custom tray for that rapid appliance pickup. So you want to leave that on there, and then you want to pick up your ridge with that. This is a big time do. When you're in surgery, maybe the day is getting long, and you are saying, oh, why, do I have to pick up a rapid appliance? Well, life is easier if you pick up a rapid, because if we don't have the rapid, then we have to find the best way to transfer the record the patient's wearing to the laboratory. We have tricks for that. We have tips for it, and that can be a fairly simple, maybe a little more labor intensive, making models on your part technique, or there's a digital technique. But if you pick up the rapid, chrome is smooth. So at a minimum, pick up 3. Put 3 temporary cylinders in, pick them up, lute them in place, remove it, and hold on to it. Because in 6 months, you can come back, add the remaining temporary cylinders, lute them to the rapid appliance, do the reline impression, do the bite, take the opposing, and then you're right back to where you would have been if you picked them all up at surgery. But please take advantage of the rapid by picking it up. We've actually had a couple doctors just pick up 2. There's a situation where even you may not even be delivering a prosthetic because of lack of torque. There's other reasons you may not deliver a prosthetic, but if you don't have torque on every implant, but you have torque on 2 or 3, put the abutments on, put the temporary cylinders on, pick up the prosthetic or the rapid, remove it, deliver a denture, send the patient home. But now you have a prosthetic that's indexed. If you don't index it at surgery, you cannot index it later. All you can do is float it in, and it doesn't have any relation to implants, you know, bone, anatomical features. It's all based on that fixation base. There's no other way to get this appliance in, because floating is just not that good of a technique when there's no flange. So to beat a dead horse, pick up the RAPID appliance. This is, you know, upper, lower case. Doctor picked up, you know, both, and smooth sailing to the final. So that was Nano-Ceramic, and that was RAPID appliance. And then I wanted to mention just a couple things about the backup dentures. We've kind of been through all kinds of materials over the years, and we've kind of settled on two options for chrome. It'll change, it'll advance in the next you know, few weeks, like everything else does. But for the last several months, this is what we've been doing. If you have a double arch chrome, we make the one on the left. These are milled from pucks of PMMA. And we do this for a couple reasons. Number one is during the surgery, if you only picked up one arch, if you only converted one arch, you don't want to deliver a different colored denture. So we make this denture out of the same material. Milled teeth, milled flange, all one piece. We paint the tissue pink just like the prosthetic, and they match. And that's important. You know, the patient wakes up and you want the same tooth shade, you want the same pink shade, and they didn't get both prosthetics delivered. It's nice to have an aesthetic turnout. On the right, I kind of block this out, because if we're doing a single arch, then we just do a printed denture instead of a milled denture. It's not quite as strong. It's very aesthetic. But matching an opposing dentition, opposing pink is not going to happen anyway. So we do a much cheaper version. This is, you know, the milled is a little bit more expensive than the printed. James can send you the fees on that. But that's the reason we do two different types of dentures. And just to show you the example, just imagine the upper is a converted prosthetic. Patient goes home, has a wonderful new upper prosthetic, but the lower didn't get converted. You don't want to have this. So the lower is an inexpensive denture. The upper is a premium milled and nano-ceramic prosthetic, different materials. And that is what I was going to end on for this program. And I'd love to take some questions. Anytime. I don't know, James, if you want to MC the Q&A part.
Yeah, so I have some questions. Actually, I have some questions from a couple of people who couldn't make it this evening, but had sent me messages or sent me questions they had sort of thought from earlier on. The first one is about breakages of the nano-ceramic. So one of these guys does a fair amount of full arch work, and his heart is broken with fractures of the provisional bridge. Takes up a lot of time, a lot of lab time, unhappy patients. With your experience of using the nano-ceramic material for the nano material for the provisional bridge, what is your experience of breakages generally?
We have very low breakage. I'm going to show something on the screen here in just a second. I'm trying to think of the last time I heard one break. It's been a while. I know that with a lot of these cases, the doctors will respect material thickness, because, you know, for some of these final restorations, a lot of these doctors are not going to full zirconia anymore. They're going to nano-ceramics. And with nano-ceramics, you have to have 14, 15 millimeters of space. And therefore, if the when I say nano-ceramics, I mean for the final with the bar, that type of restoration.
Yes.
But that means that the prosthetic that the patient's wearing during healing is 14 or 15 millimeters thick. It's also
Yes.
a little bit bulky buccolingually, so they are strong, and they should be stronger than a denture, because you're talking about dentures that he has breaking, converted dentures.
Yes, denture conversion. Yeah, denture conversion.
Yes, and processed acrylic. See, it depends on how that laboratory is processing that acrylic. If they're using Ivocap and it's a thick denture, they're going to have good success. If it's not, if it's just boil out denture and economy denture, and then they're doing just a chair side reline at surgery, it's not the strongest material out there, and so they're going to have issues. Now, often, when we see breakage, it's not on the thick prosthetics; it's on the thin prosthetics. And when you have a thin prosthetic, you have this option. You can order a metal substructure.
Right.
There's a premium fee for it, James. I think it's a couple $100 extra, and it seems like a lot, but this is SLM printed. There's design work in trimming this out and then finishing it, and then designing the restoration to accommodate it. So there is some extra work. So we do charge for it, but that's about as strong as it can be, especially if you're going to have a patient in a temp long term. More than 4 or 5, 6 months, then maybe this would be an option for them on a thin prosthetic. Does that answer it?
Yeah. So, and your definition of a thin prosthetic is sort of 10 to 12 millimeters, that type of?
Yeah, I think 12 is okay too. I think when you get down into the 10s, and especially with some patient history, beware of cantilevers. Don't adjust it to be thinner. Let us do the thickness part of it, and then if it gets down into less than that, do a metal reinforcement. But then also, as I kind of reiterated during the meeting, pick up the RAPID appliance, because if you have a RAPID and you have a fractured prosthetic, you have a means of relating the records to the laboratory instantly.
Yeah. Okay.
The
other question that's come up in to do with material choice is we see more and more people talking about providing temporaries printed, printed temporaries. My personal fear for that is that it's no way strong enough at this stage. But what's your experience of it? If you have
full arch,
yeah.
That there is very limited number of materials out there that you could do a printed full arch that is any more than chair side equilibration. So Dentsply came out with Lucitone this year, printed Lucitone. It's pink, so the teeth have to be milled out of something else or printed out of something else. That we're now offering that as as more of a premium denture material, but that we also have used that on full arch on temporary cylinders, and that's about the only printed material out there I would consider. Calzer has a nice material now. We've been printing dentures with Calzer for about 2.5, almost 3 years.
Yeah.
And as long as that has the right thickness to it, you could also use that in some, in a bunch of situations. But in general, I would avoid printed until and I would avoid printed at all for conversion dentures. I would probably avoid that. The only way I would probably do that is if and I'm going to get into a little bit in the weeds here, but the trouble with printed bases and printed teeth is that the teeth, they're printed separately, right? So now if you have implants if you have implant trajectories are going through teeth, which is going to happen in the posterior, sometimes in the anterior, all of a sudden you have 3, 4, 5, 6 sections of teeth that are printed to go between all the implants. Just doesn't work very well. These prosthetics have to be monolithic, milled, and then the pink is painted on.
Yeah. Okay.
Right.
That's fair enough. Another question is about occlusion. So the occlusion on your provisional bridge over here, and you listen to people like Mallow, etc. The advice is very much that it's an anteriorized occlusion at that stage of posterior teeth. What's the general feeling over there amongst the people using CHROME and how they set up their occlusion immediately after surgery?
Well, you mean anterior, and you cut out a little bit. You mean full round occlusion around the entire arch?
No, basically to almost avoid posterior contacts.
No molar or second bite contact?
Well, basically to avoid anything heavy posterior?
Well, I guess I'm going to ask, save that question for Joe for next
Yeah, okay.
Wednesday. But my opinion is every time I see a chrome case get equilibrated, there's blue marks everywhere.
Yeah, yeah. Right from loading, right from the initial loading.
Oh, absolutely. No question. And you know, I think a lot of these cases are set up like dentures where you have 1 millimeter overjet, 1 millimeter overbite, and posterior occlusion.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, okay.
It's interesting because on our journeys around, it's a common question. And the general feeling, well, I suppose lots of people will differ in what they think, but it's generally more have anterior contacts rather than posterior contacts. I just was wondering whether it was slightly different over there.
Well, that's a first for me. And however, you know, we are very flexible with this. You know, the doctor has ultimate choice, and that can be whether it's lingualized, whether it's flat plane, whether it's 0-0, whether it's overjet, no overjet. I mean, anything. Whatever occlusal scheme the doctor wants, we match. No matter what, we can do that with. I mean, because it's digital, and because we can share the digital files with you to share with the doctor. We do resets until the doctor's happy. That's no problem at all.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's fine. Just because I've met quite a number of people with very different views on it. Yeah.
Well, you know, I have to have an occlusion program, and that'll be about 4 to 6 hours.
Yeah, don't. The preview, is it classed as true digital smile design in terms of how the way you use it?
I would say it is, well, in terms of how we use it, yes. But you would not compare it to a DSD. You would not compare it to a diagnostic wax up, or a, you know, tooth by tooth by tooth situation of a crown and bridge patient. It's not the same. These cases, all the teeth are disappearing, all the pink is being replaced, and we don't have carte blanche to do whatever we want. But there's a buccal corridor, and there's soft tissue, there's lips, there's opposing. I mean, we build the design within the confines of the existing architecture for sure. But it's not, you know what I mean? It's not the same as those other types of workups. No.
Yeah, that's okay.
I mean, you think just in a nutshell, you think if a patient's going to have an immediate denture, you have some liberties there.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It just came up just today, actually. I suppose people think that it's going down the line of full DSD type digital design, but as I tried to say, we actually don't need to go that far.
No, we don't. And I think DSD for the time, maybe there's an argument out there. I think it's more of a crown and bridge type. And I know that they have all kinds of modules with cone beam and surgical guides and so forth. But I think for this protocol, preview and a simple smile simulation, 2D smile simulation works wonderfully.
Yeah. Okay. A question then, Alan, about whenever you get to the point, so the temporary bridge has been in and you're heading towards your rapid. Healing has taken place and maybe one of the abutments has become exposed and you want to change the abutment.
Yeah.
So you want to lower the abutment from a 3.5 to a 2.5. Good.
Yeah, simple procedure. You know, most systems, the multi-unit abutment is universal. Doesn't matter what size you're ordering, it still has the same temporary cylinder. So you would grind out that site, and so you'd have the temporary cylinder with some acrylic around it in your hand, put in the abutment that you want, and then just pick up that cylinder again in the new position. Simple.
Yeah. Okay. Also, you have a loose abutment. So say, for example, you've got a straight abutment. You've taken off your provisional bridge and you're just going around tightening everything up and making sure everything's okay. And you tighten one of these abutments down and you realize that it's actually gone another 0.5 mil down, or the abutment has slightly moved or altered, do you just, again, pick it up like you've just described?
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully there was enough torque on the implant at surgery that you were able to torque that abutment in. It should be final.
Yeah.
Because if you're going back and having to torque abutments in, that prosthetic is not passive anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Okay.
That's the point I'm trying to make, really. Is that if at surgery, for some reason, you haven't got that abutment fully down, that needs to be noted, so that when it comes towards the final, that you reposition that temporary cylinder within your Nano-Ceramic, or within your RAPID Appliance.
Right.
Before you send it off. Yeah.
Yep, that's it.
The other one, and it's been raised a couple of times, is the profile of the Nano-Ceramic. It's very flat. How much variability do you have there?
I didn't catch the middle part of it. You said passive or
No.
profile?
Yeah, the profile of the Nano-Ceramic is flat. Okay, so it's very flat with a reasonably sharp edge on it.
Yes.
Is that something that will change? Is that something other people have commented on?
Yeah, on the intaglio, as it comes around to the facial, it has a flat.
Yeah.
It's too flat. We don't tip it in enough.
Yeah.
You know, I've heard that twice now in the last few weeks, and we've been rolling. It used to be a ledge, James.
Yes.
And it is sort of a ledge now because one side is flat, but we were supposed to tip that in. Now, I know what we do digitally, and that is we try to follow the contours of the future bone position, not the current future bone position. And then add a little bit for tissue, and that is where the prosthetic should be tipped in. That is our protocol. If you find that we are still doing that, of course, you don't want to have to grind and tip that in. But now that you mention that, I'll tell you what, I'm going to go have a look at some going out the door today, and I'll see if we've made any changes at all on the right angle. Yeah. Because you can see the one I have here on the image. This is a very relatively recent case here on the screen. That's tipped in. Yeah.
No, that's okay. It's just been mentioned to me a couple of times.
Yeah.
What's your feeling on how much tissue compression is required when you fit the provisional, or should there be any tissue compression at all?
Well, James, how do you feel about that?
Yeah. Well, when I used to do them conventionally, we found the tissue compression was sometimes too much.
Yeah.
The bridges were very difficult to fit. And I wasn't always convinced that it led to better healing. With the CHROME Nano-Ceramic, the fits are very easy because it doesn't push overly hard on the soft tissue. And so far, I can't see any great difference in terms of the healing process as the patient goes through, get towards their final bridge.
Yeah, I would agree. If I look at 100 cases, I find that prosthetic is meeting the tissue just about everywhere, and it's swollen, from surgery, and a little bit of compression is just fine. And then 6 months down the road, there's a little bit of a gap. Yeah. And all of that is okay.
Yeah, that's fine. That's fine. It's just because whenever you raise the point about not adding to it, not adding to the fit surface, or that's something that I think people might be tempted to do.
Yeah, but it's not. That may be more of chatting with the patient than worrying about the gap. Yeah. Right. Because you can always add. You can always add later if you really want to. If the patient's having real problems on the upper with airspace and lisping and that type of thing, you can do it later. but I wouldn't do it at surgery. I mean, unless somehow you really came up with a gap. But if you really came up with a gap, that is sockets or a bone reduction issue, or a patient just happened to have very thin tissue. But it really should be an anomaly if you have a big gap.
Yeah. Okay. Question just come in. You think you mentioned it, but maybe it's worthwhile going back over it. Why no contact between the temporary cylinder and the temporary bridge?
Well, we don't want any lateral forces on the implant, right? We want it to be a passive pickup. And if somehow inserting that prosthetic hit, for instance, the angled part of a temporary cylinder or the side of a temporary cylinder and was still pushed down and seated on the carrier guide, and it has an off-axis pressure on the implant, I think just as a rule, that's not something you want. And the prosthetic should just be passive and not have any contact with any metal. Am I answering the right question?
Yeah, no, yeah, absolutely. I think that's a fair answer.
Okay.
Another question. Roughly how long is it taking to do the rapid appliance stage per arch?
Yeah, and what you'll find with the rapid is that, of course, it's a repeat of the nano pickup. So if you have a little adjustment here or a little adjustment there because of angled implants, it's easy to repeat. It's also easier to grind the acrylic on a rapid appliance. It's a much weaker material, so it's a lot faster. And then, and again, if it's a time thing, if it's a patient discomfort thing, pick up 2, pick up 3, and then move on and pick the other ones up later. But the important thing is that you just get it indexed. A matter of time, oh boy, I don't know. Certainly screwing down temporary cylinders is easier than screwing down abutments.
Yeah, well, I think the time question was when it comes to the final stage, Alan, the final conversion stage.
Oh, forgive me. Okay, well, you unscrew the, you mean just clinically?
Yeah.
Okay, so you unscrew the Nano-Ceramic, you put tray adhesive on the intaglio of the rapid appliance, you seat the rapid appliance, you equilibrate it until the bite is right, you reline backfill underneath to pick up the gap, you take a bite, take the opposing, unscrew the prosthetic, put it all in a box and send it to you.
Yeah.
Take an hour.
Yeah.
On your first one.
And photos.
And some photos. You think an hour, James, that would be appropriate?
Yeah, that's what I'm advising people. I just was interested to know what. I don't want to answer all the questions, so I'm interested your experience.
I think so. And maybe you could judge it based on how the surgery went. If you had some occlusal equilibrations, maybe if it's considerable adjustment at surgery, then maybe you do block out a little bit more time for equilibration, maybe. But an hour.
Yeah. That's okay. That's all right. And do most people go from that rapid appliance straight to finish? Or what percentage of people will go for a retry?
It's a low percentage, and there's a couple of reasons for that. One is the package. When you purchase the package from Quoris3D, it includes a try-in. And why not take advantage of it? There's going to be changes on the intaglio. You may have a little bit of a reset. Patient had some aesthetic changes, that kind of thing. You probably want to try it in. We have a few KOLs who've done, many cases, and they've refined a technique on lowers. They go to final. It's just a little different animal than the upper. And then on some uppers, depending on how close you are, if it's a matter of just making some adjustments, thinning the prosthetic out, patient speech is okay, you can go to final.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. That's okay. I'll just check, but I think that's all the questions that I have.
Okay. Well, James, do you want to say the thank you?
Yeah, listen, thank you again. Thanks to Alan. This is it's an awful lot of work putting these presentations together, but it's great because we get a very good and up-to-date bank of YouTube videos that people can watch in their own leisure, because coming on an evening webinar doesn't suit that many people nowadays.
Yeah.
But the option at hand that you can watch a 30-40 minute video is very useful. So really thank you, Alan, and we look forward to next week.
Okay, good. Next week
see
is more,
Joe, is that right?
Yeah, Joe Ambrose, he's a technical director at our laboratory, and he has been working on this since before it was a product, before it was a available product, and through all the development. But he's a fixed removal technician with many, many years of experience, I think 35 years here. But he's more about the fundamentals of the bite, the smile, the vertical, the records, how to analyze a patient before you get started on one of these cases. It's very much worth dialing in.
Brilliant. Thank you, Alan.
Okay. Thank you.
Cheers.